Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. October in Tennessee promises perfect camping weather, and that's exactly what Kayla and I were banking on. We're both 24, grinding away at our desk jobs in Nashville. She's in a downtown marketing firm, and I'm plugging data for a medical billing company. It's the kind of work that makes you watch the clock every 5 minutes, wondering how it's only Tuesday. We spent weeks texting each other links to different camping spots and trails during our lunch breaks, finally settling on a remote area in the Cherokee National Forest. Kayla and I have been friends since middle school, the kind of friends who can sit for hours in silence and still have a good time. We aren't really rugged outdoorsy types, just two people who needed trees instead of traffic, stars instead of streetlights, and the sound of wind through the leaves instead of our bosses asking for updates. The plan was simple: drive out Friday morning, hike to a secluded clearing we'd found on an online camping forum, spend 2 nights under the stars, and come back Sunday feeling like actual human beings. My old Subaru Outback was stuffed to the roof with our gear: the tent, sleeping bags, a cooler full of food, and honestly, probably way too much stuff for a weekend trip. The drive from Nashville took about 3 hours, the last 40 minutes on a narrow gravel road that had my car protesting with every pothole. We pulled into the trailhead parking area around noon and felt an instant wave of relief. It was completely empty. No other cars, no voices echoing through the trees, just us and miles of forest. The trail to our campsite was marked with faded blue blazes on the trees. The forum promised it was only 3 miles to a clearing described as a secluded paradise. Kayla had brought an old film camera she found at Goodwill, and she kept stopping me to take photos of the huge, ancient oak trees with bark so deeply grooved it looked prehistoric. The forest felt genuinely alive. Birds had full conversations above us, chipmunks zipped across the path, and a steady breeze made the whole canopy sway like it was breathing. After about 2 hours of hiking, our shoulders were sore and our shirts were damp with sweat. Then, we finally stepped into the clearing. It was exactly what the forum promised: a flat, open space surrounded by towering pines, with a makeshift fire ring of gathered stones and a massive fallen tree that would make a perfect bench. We dropped our packs and just stood there for a minute, breathing in the thick air, feeling like we had absolutely found what we were looking for. Setting up camp took us about an hour, mostly because Kayla insisted on finding the perfect angle for the tent so we'd wake up with the sunlight hitting it just right. While she fussed with the stakes, I gathered kindling and explored the edges of the clearing. I noticed these odd marks on some of the pine trees, deep, shoulder-height gouges in the bark, almost like someone had started to carve something but stopped halfway. I decided it was probably from hunters marking their territory, or maybe a bear scratching its back, but I kept the bear thought to myself since Kayla was already paranoid about wildlife. By late afternoon, everything was set. The tent was secured, the sleeping bags were rolled out, and our food was safely hung up in a bear bag about 50 feet from camp. The forest had grown quieter as the day wore on, the busy bird chatter replaced by only occasional calls in the distance. We made sandwiches and sat on the fallen log, watching the sun filter through the pine needles in golden streams that made the scene look like a painting. Kayla was complaining about how her boss had tried to call her that morning about a campaign deadline, and we were laughing about how there was no way anyone could reach us out here. Our phones had shown no service since we'd left the main road. Around 500, just as we were deciding whether to start the fire or explore a little more before dark, we heard footsteps on the trail. Not the light, quick steps of a deer or the shuffling of a raccoon, but deliberate, heavy bootsteps crunching through the dry leaves. A man emerged from the tree line, and immediately, he looked out of place. He was wearing clean khaki pants and a button-up shirt, like he was dressed for a business, casual Friday, not a hiking trail. His hair was slicked back with so much gel it looked wet, and he had a perfectly trimmed goatee that belonged in a suburban office park. But what really made my chest tighten was the rifle slung over his shoulder. While not unusual in Tennessee, it was the way he carried it, too casual, like a fashion accessory. He stopped at the edge of our clearing, maybe 20 feet away, and just stared at us. It wasn't a friendly, "Hey, fellow campers, look." It was a cold assessment, like he was cataloging our entire campsite. Kayla's fingers dug into my arm hard enough to leave a mark. We stayed frozen on the log, waiting for him to break the silence. "You girls don't belong here," he finally said, his voice strangely flat, as if he were reading a memorized script. He took 3 steps into the clearing, his dress shoes crunching on the pine needles. The rifle shifted, and I got a better look, an expensive-looking hunting rifle with a scope, the metal gleaming like it had been freshly polished. His eyes were a pale gray, almost silver in the fading sunlight, and they never blinked as he looked between me and Kayla. "This is private property, family land, goes back generations." The way he emphasized each word, as if we were children who needed a slow explanation, made my skin prickle with both anger and fear. Kayla found her voice first, always the braver one. She said we had checked all the maps and that this was national forest land where public camping was allowed with the proper permits. He smiled then, but it was all teeth and no warmth. The kind of smile you'd see on someone enjoying a cruel joke. "Maps can be wrong," he said, taking another step closer. "Government makes mistakes all the time, but we know what's ours." I stood up slowly, pulling Kayla with me, trying to keep my voice steady as I told him we would leave immediately if there was a misunderstanding. My legs felt shaky, but I forced myself to move toward the tent, thinking if we could just pack up quickly, everything would be fine. But he moved too, positioning himself between us and the trail we'd used to come in. He still wore that horrible, empty smile. "Where are you from?" he asked, like it was a normal conversation, even though he was blocking our only exit. "Nashville," Kayla answered, her voice sounding higher than usual. "City girls," he whispered, almost like a curse word. "Coming out here thinking you own the place. Setting up camp wherever you please." His free hand, the one not holding the rifle strap, kept opening and closing into a fist. I noticed his fingernails were strangely long for a man, filed into sharp points. The sun was dropping behind the trees, casting long shadows. A wave of panic hit me. Even if we ran now, we'd be hiking 3 miles in the dark through unfamiliar forest with this man potentially following us. "We'll pack up right now," I said again, louder this time, moving toward the tent. No need for trouble. We didn't know. But he just stood there, watching us with those unblinking silver eyes, his pointed fingernails now tapping a steady rhythm against the rifle stock. It sounded like a countdown. We started packing frantically, shoving sleeping bags into sacks without rolling them, yanking tent stakes out so hard one bent completely in half. The man had moved again, now standing by the fire ring, running his fingers along the stones. "You know what we do to trespassers out here?" he asked, his voice carrying clearly across the clearing, even though he was practically whispering. "Same thing we've always done. Same thing my daddy did and his daddy before him." Kayla dropped the tent pole she was holding. The metal clanged against a rock, and the sound echoed forever in the growing darkness. I could hear her breathing quicken, those little gasps that signaled she was on the verge of a panic attack. The man unslung his rifle, not pointing it at us yet, but cradling it in his arms like a baby, running those sharp fingernails along the wooden stock. "There are stories about these woods," he continued, taking slow, measured steps around the edge of our clearing, like an animal circling its prey. "Stories about girls who didn't listen, who thought they knew better." Every instinct in my body screamed to run, but our packs were still half full, our bare bags were still hanging, and I knew we'd need some supplies if we were going to make it back to the car in the dark. Then, we heard it. Another set of footsteps, this time coming from the opposite side of the clearing, from deeper in the forest where there was no trail. A second man emerged. He was younger, maybe in his early 20s, with the same unsettling silver eyes, but his hair was wild and uncombed, hanging to his shoulders in greasy strands. He wore overalls with no shirt underneath, and his chest was covered in intricate scars that looked deliberate, like someone had carved patterns into his skin. "Found them, just like you said, Uncle Roy," the younger one called out. His voice had a strange, sing-song quality, making his words sound like a taunt. He was holding something in his right hand. At first, I thought it was a stick, but as he moved closer, I saw it was a machete. The blade was rusty except for the edge, which gleamed sharp and clean. 2 of them, just like those ones from last spring. My whole body went rigid at that comment. Kayla made a small whimpering sound and gripped my hand so hard I felt my bones might break. Uncle Roy, apparently that was the first man's name, smiled wider. His teeth were too white, too perfect, like dentures that didn't quite fit his mouth. "City girls never learn," he said, shifting his rifle so it pointed loosely in our direction. Not fully aimed, but close enough to make the threat perfectly clear. "They come out here with their fancy gear and their maps, thinking the whole world belongs to them." The younger man laughed. A high-pitched giggle that didn't match his scarred chest and wild appearance, spinning the machete like a baton. "Please," I managed to say, surprised my voice worked at all. "We're leaving right now. We won't tell anyone about this place, we promise." Even as the words left my mouth, I knew how pathetic they sounded. The nephew, as I was thinking of him, had moved to block the other side of the clearing, the one that led deeper into the forest. We were trapped between them, two girls with half-packed camping gear against two armed men who knew every tree and rock for miles. Uncle Roy completely unslung the rifle now, checking the chamber with a practiced ease. "You know what the problem is with promises from city folk?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. "They don't mean nothing. Just words. Like when the government promised to leave our land alone." He spat a thick wad of tobacco juice onto the ground near our tent. The sudden mountain darkness was closing in fast. One minute you can see shapes, the next you're blind. Our flashlights were in our packs, but reaching for them felt like a risk, like it might trigger whatever they were planning. Kayla's panic was escalating, her whole body was shaking against mine, her gasping breaths getting shorter. Without warning, Uncle Roy raised the rifle and fired into the air. The sound exploded through the clearing like a cannon. Both Kayla and I screamed, dropping to the ground instantly, our ears ringing from the blast. When I looked up, both men were laughing. The nephew was actually doubled over, slapping his knee. "Run," Uncle Roy said, lowering the rifle until it was pointed directly at us. "You got 30 seconds head start. Better make them count." For a heartbeat, neither of us moved, our brains refusing to process the words. Then the nephew started counting loud and slow. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi. Kayla yanked me to my feet and we ran, leaving everything. Our tent, packs, phones behind. We crashed through the underbrush away from the men, branches whipping our faces and arms. Roots tried to trip us with every step. Behind us, the nephew's voice grew fainter. 15 Mississippi. 16 Mississippi. My mind raced, scrambling to remember the map. A creek was supposed to be somewhere to the east, and if we found it, we could follow it downstream to a road. But in this darkness, with no light or compass, east might as well have been Mars. We kept running, our breathing so loud I was sure they could track us by sound alone, waiting for the counting to stop, waiting for the hunt to begin. The counting stopped at 30, and then we heard the worst sound possible, whooping and hollering, like this was a celebration. Another gunshot cracked, fired into the sky, followed by that high-pitched giggle from the nephew. We kept running blind, holding hands so we wouldn't lose each other, when suddenly, Kayla's foot caught on something, and we both went down hard. My knee slammed against a rock, and I felt the skin tear open, warm blood instantly soaking through my jeans. But the pain was nothing compared to the terror when we heard branches breaking, maybe 100 yards behind us. They were tracking us, and they were getting closer. Kayla pulled me behind a massive fallen tree, and we pressed ourselves against the rotting bark, trying to control our ragged breathing. My heart was pounding so violently I was sure they could hear it. For maybe 5 minutes, we stayed frozen there, listening to them crashing through the forest, sometimes closer, sometimes farther. Then I remembered something. My car keys were in my pocket, and attached to them was a tiny LED keychain light my mother had given me. With shaking fingers, I pulled it out and clicked it on. The weak beam barely reached 3 feet into the darkness, but it was enough to see that we were near a steep slope heading downward. At the bottom, I could hear it water running over rocks. We half slid, half fell down that slope, using trees to slow our descent, both of us getting covered in mud and dead leaves. The creek was about 10 feet wide, shallow, but moving fast and cold enough to steal our breath when we splashed into it. We didn't stop, following it downstream, slipping on the algae, covered rocks and falling into the water over and over until we were soaked and shivering. Behind us, I heard Uncle Roy's voice, closer than expected. "They're in the water. Smart little things." Another gunshot. This time I heard the bullet hit a tree somewhere to our left. We ran faster, the creek gradually widening, the sound of the water hopefully masking our splashing. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, we saw lights through the trees, a house, then another, then the blessed sight of a paved road. We scrambled up the bank, our soaked clothes weighing us down, and ran toward the nearest house with a porch light on. The elderly woman who answered our frantic knocking took one look at us, soaked, bloody, crying, and immediately called 911 while pulling us inside. The police found our campsite destroyed, everything torn apart or stolen, but no trace of the 2 men. They confirmed there was no private family land in that area. It had been federal forest for 50 years, but they also admitted there had been other reports campers run off by locals claiming ownership, though none had been shot at before. Kayla and I drove back to Nashville in silence the next day after giving our statements and declining to press charges we weren't even sure would stick. We never went camping again, and we never talked about that night after the first week. But sometimes I still Google that area, searching for news about missing hikers, terrified of what I might find. Last August, I went camping with my college friends at Pine Ridge State Park in Colorado. We were all nursing graduates who had just finished our board exams, and this trip was our celebration before we scattered to different hospitals across the country. There were 5 of us: me, Jessica, Amber, Nicole, and Megan. We'd picked a remote campsite, about 40 minutes from the main road, next to a small creek with a peaceful bubbling sound. We spent the whole day hiking, roasting marshmallows, and catching up. By the time we crawled into our tents around 11:00 p.m., I was wonderfully exhausted. Jessica and I were sharing one tent, Amber and Nicole had another, and Megan had her own small one because she snored. I remember waking up to a soft, polite knocking on our tent. Not a bang or a scratch, just 3 gentle taps, like someone knocking on an office door. My phone showed 2:07 a.m. I figured maybe Megan needed something, but then I heard a voice, and it definitely wasn't hers. "Excuse me. Hello. I'm so sorry to bother you, but I really need some help." The voice was high and sweet with a slight southern drawl. Jessica was still asleep beside me. The woman knocked again, still gentle, still polite. "Please, I know it's late, but my phone died and I'm lost. I just need to make a quick call." I grabbed my flashlight and slowly unzipped the tent flap, just enough to peek out. What I saw made every muscle in my body tense up. A woman was standing about 3 feet from our tent, and she looked utterly out of place. She was wearing a floral sundress, tiny yellow daisies on white fabric, and strappy sandals with small heels. Her hair was fixed in an elaborate bun with what looked like pearl pins. She was wearing full makeup, red lipstick and everything, as if she'd just come from a wedding reception. But here's the key detail: she had nothing with her. No backpack, no purse, no phone, no flashlight, no jacket, nothing. The nearest parking area was at least a 30-minute hike through rough terrain, and she was standing there in heels and a sundress like she'd just stepped out of a garden party. She smiled when she saw me, a perfectly normal, friendly smile. "Oh, thank goodness you're awake. I'm so embarrassed, but I got separated from my group, and I've been walking for hours trying to find my way back to the parking lot." Her voice was calm and pleasant. I asked her about her group. She tilted her head, thinking. "We were having a little get-together, a celebration actually, but I went for a walk to see the stars and I guess I wandered too far." She gave a tinkling, rehearsed little laugh. "The thing is, we'd deliberately chosen this spot because it was isolated. There were no other campsites nearby, and definitely no parties happening in the middle of the forest on a Friday night." I told her I could let her use my phone and started reaching back into the tent to grab it. That's when she took a step closer. "Actually, would you mind walking me back to the main trail? I'm terrible with directions, and I'd probably just get lost again." She clasped her hands in front of her with a hopeful look. Every instinct was screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. Who hikes in heels? Who gets lost in a sundress? And how did she find our specific tent in the pitch black? I told her I'd wake up my friends, and we could all help her together. The moment I said that, her expression shifted for a fraction of a second, a flash of frustration, before the smile snapped back into place. "Oh, no, please don't wake them. I'd feel so guilty disturbing everyone. You seem so kind. Couldn't you just point me in the right direction?" Before I could answer, I heard a sound that made my whole body go rigid. From somewhere behind the woman, deeper in the forest, came a low whistle. It was definitely human. The woman didn't react to it at all, she just kept staring at me. Then, another whistle answered from the opposite direction, maybe 50 feet to our left. And another one behind our tents. My heart hammered in my ears. The woman was still talking. Something about needing a few minutes of my time, but I wasn't listening. I was counting the whistles. They were coming from at least 4 different directions, and they were getting closer. The woman must have noticed my panic because she reached out her hand toward me. "Please, honey. I really need your help. Just come with me for a minute." Her fingers were inches from the tent flap. That's when I noticed her nails. They were caked with dirt underneath, like she'd been digging. I yanked the zipper shut so fast I almost broke it. The woman's voice immediately changed, dropping the sweet southern accent entirely. "Open the tent." It was flat and emotionless. I shook Jessica awake, clamping my hand over her mouth before she could scream. Her eyes went wide when she saw my face, and I whispered that we needed to wake the others now. The woman outside had gone quiet, but I could hear footsteps circling our tent, slow and deliberate. Then more footsteps from different directions, all converging. Jessica grabbed the emergency whistle from her backpack while I fumbled with my phone to call 911, but there was no signal. We were too deep in the park. The footsteps stopped. Everything went silent for about 10 seconds. Then, all hell broke loose. Someone started shaking Megan's tent violently, and I heard her scream. At the same time, something heavy slammed into the side of our tent, nearly knocking it over. Jessica started blowing the emergency whistle as loud as she could while I screamed for everyone to stay in their tents. The beam of my flashlight swung wildly, and through the tent fabric, I caught glimpses. There were at least 5 people out there, all in regular street clothes. A man in khakis and a polo shirt was pulling up Amber and Nicole's tent stakes. Another woman in a cocktail dress was cutting through Megan's rainfly with something sharp. They weren't speaking, they were working systematically. Jessica kept blowing that whistle, and I was hitting the emergency button on my phone, hoping it would store our GPS location. Then, Amber did something that probably saved us. She had an air horn she'd brought as a joke to wake us up, and she started blasting it over and over. The sound was deafening, echoing through the forest like a siren. The attackers actually stopped for a second, looking at each other. The woman in the sundress made a sharp gesture with her hand, and they all started moving faster, more aggressively. But Amber kept hitting that air horn, and within about 30 seconds, we heard dogs barking in the distance. Another camping group, about half a mile away, had 2 German shepherds, and those dogs were going crazy. Then we saw flashlight beams bouncing through the trees, getting closer, and male voices shouting, asking if everything was okay. The woman in the sundress whistled once, sharp and loud, and just like that, they all stopped and melted back into the forest. The other campers reached us about 2 minutes later, 3 guys and an older couple with their dogs. They found us huddled together between our ruined tents. Megan's tent was shredded, all our stakes were pulled up, and our gear was scattered everywhere. The men helped us gather what we could while the woman called the park rangers on their satellite phone. We didn't wait. We hiked out in the dark with our rescuers, leaving most of our gear behind. The dogs kept growling and looking back into the forest, hackles raised. At the ranger station, we filed reports and gave descriptions. But the rangers seemed unusually unsurprised. One older ranger with gray hair pulled me aside and told me we were lucky. He said there had been similar incidents over the past 5 years, groups of people in strange clothes approaching campers at night, always with a polite request for help, always trying to separate one person from their group. He showed me a map with red pins marking the incidents. At least 12 of them, all in remote camping areas within a 100-mile radius. He suspected it was an organized group, maybe human traffickers or something worse, but they could never find any trace of them afterward. No footprints, no campsite, no vehicles, nothing. 2 months later, I got a call from him. They'd arrested 8 people after they tried the same thing on an off-duty cop who was camping with his family. It turned out to be a group that had been kidnapping campers for years, taking them across state lines. They would pick isolated spots, send in someone non-threatening looking first to gauge the situation, then attack if they couldn't lure someone away peacefully. The woman in the sundress was the ringleader's wife. We were lucky that night. Luckier than I probably realize even now. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd stepped out of that tent. The ranger told me they found evidence the group had been watching us all day. What still haunts me is how normal that woman seemed at first. How reasonable her request for help sounded. I've gone camping since then, but never without a satellite phone, never in isolated spots. And I always trust my gut when something doesn't add up. If someone knocks on your tent in the middle of the night, no matter how polite they sound, don't open it. Real hikers in trouble don't approach sleeping campers at 200 a.m. dressed for a dinner party. The old Riverside Playhouse had been abandoned for 12 years when we decided to drive out there that Saturday night. People in town had started calling it the Purple Castle, after some kids swore they saw the metal cross on top glowing violet at midnight, a story that sounded ridiculous until half the senior class started repeating it. The building sat on Route 47, about 6 miles past the last gas station. It was a massive brick structure that was once a Methodist church before being converted into a community theater. My dad's construction company had bid on the renovation years ago, so I knew the layout from the old blueprints he kept. The building had narrow Gothic windows, most of them broken now, and the white paint was peeling off in sheets. By day, it was an eyesore, but at night, with the fog rolling in from the creek, it seemed to lean forward, as if listening. Travis had been obsessed with the story for weeks, showing up with screenshots from local Facebook groups. His cousin, Bethany, was visiting from Michigan and thought we were idiots for believing the legend, but she came along anyway because watching cable TV at her aunt's house was worse. We took my dad's F-150, a beast of a truck, out onto the back roads. We pulled into the gravel lot around 11:45 p.m., and the first thing I noticed was the heavy, wrong kind of silence that made your ears ring. The playhouse loomed above us, 4 stories of brick and broken dreams, the metal cross catching the moonlight and looking silver. Definitely not purple. Travis immediately started filming with his phone while Bethany and I grabbed our flashlights. The main entrance was boarded up, but we found a side door near the loading dock that kids had pried open. Inside, the air smelled like mold and bird droppings. Our footsteps echoed in that specific way that tells you a place has been empty for too long. The lobby still had the old ticket booth, and someone had painted, "Abandoned Hope," across the concession stand. The main theater was through double doors that groaned in protest when we pushed them open. Rows of red velvet seats stretched toward a stage where the curtain had partially collapsed. Travis kept whispering about electromagnetic fields while waving his phone around. But all I could focus on was a weird smell, like copper pennies mixed with something chemical. Bethany found the stairs to the balcony behind the old coat check. From up there, we could see the whole theater, including the orchestra pit filled with broken chairs and old bird nests. The ceiling had partially caved in near the back, creating a jagged hole where you could see straight up to the bell tower where the cross was mounted. At exactly midnight, Travis's phone started going haywire, the screen flickering, the flashlight strobing rapidly. Then we heard a deep grinding sound from above us, like concrete scraping against metal, slow and deliberate. Bethany gripped my arm hard, and we all looked up at the hole in the ceiling just as something moved across it, blocking out the stars for a second. It wasn't floating, it seemed to be climbing, using the exposed beams like a jungle gym. The cross wasn't purple, but a faint violet glow was pulsing from somewhere behind it, like a heartbeat. Travis tried to zoom in with his camera, but it refused to focus, showing only blur and static. The grinding sound got louder, and pieces of plaster started raining down, hitting the seats below with sharp little pops. That's when we saw the first claw mark appear on one of the exposed wooden beams. Fresh splinters curled away from 4 parallel gouges that had to be 8 inches long. Whatever was up there was heavy enough to make the whole building groan, and it was moving toward the ladder that led down from the bell tower. The same ladder we'd need to pass to get back to the stairs. My dad had taught me to recognize stress sounds in old buildings, and what I was hearing now meant something far too large was putting weight on compromised structures. Bethany was already backing toward the balcony stairs, her flashlight beam shaking, while Travis kept muttering, "Holy shit," and still trying to film. Another scraping sound echoed through the theater, closer this time, and a shower of wood dust drifted down through our flashlight beams like snow. The smell got stronger, too. That copper penny stench mixed with something else. Something organic and wrong, like roadkill that had been baking in the sun. We bolted down those balcony stairs so fast, I'm surprised nobody broke a neck. Our footsteps thundered through the empty building, while that grinding, scraping noise followed from above. In the lobby, Travis tripped over a pile of old theater programs and went down hard, his phone skittering across the floor. As Bethany and I hauled him up, we heard the unmistakable sound of wood splintering above us, followed by a crash that shook dust from every surface. Through the doorway to the theater, we could see something dropping from the ceiling in chunks. Not just plaster and wood, but something dark and wet that hit the seats with heavy, meaty thuds. The side door we'd entered through was only 20 feet away, but those were the longest 20 feet of my life, especially when we heard whatever was up there start moving faster. The building's old structure creaked and popped under its weight like knuckles cracking. We burst out into the cold November air, the temperature difference making my lungs burn. The truck was right where we'd left it, thank God, and I had the keys out before we even reached it, fumbling with the copper pipe keychain my dad had made. That's when Travis screamed and pointed at the roof of the playhouse. Something huge was perched on the bell tower, silhouetted against the moon. It was the size of a small car but moved like a massive cat, muscles rippling under what looked like patchy fur or maybe feathers. The purple glow was coming from behind it, inside the bell tower itself, casting a sick violet outline around its body. The thing's head turned toward us. Even from 50 yards away, I could see eyes that reflected our flashlights like a deer's. Except there were too many of them, arranged wrong, scattered across what should have been its face. It made a sound that wasn't quite a roar, more like a deep whistle mixed with grinding metal, and started climbing down the side of the building, its claws gouging the brick. The truck started on the second try, a miracle in that cold. I threw it into reverse so hard the transmission screamed, spinning gravel as we tore out of the parking lot. Behind us, I heard that thing hit the ground with a thud that I swear we felt through the truck's chassis. Then came the sound of it running heavy, rhythmic impacts that were gaining on us way too fast for something that size. Bethany was turned around, watching through the back window, her voice climbing higher as she described it loping after us on all fours, covering maybe 15 feet with each bound. I hit 60 on that narrow access road, way too fast, but in the side mirror, I could see those eyes getting closer, all 6 or 7 of them glowing in the reflection of our tail lights. Then it jumped, truly jumped, launching itself in an impossible arc that brought it down right in the truck bed with an impact that briefly lifted the front wheels off the ground. The whole truck lurched sideways as thousands of pounds of muscle and fury landed, and I fought to keep us on the road while metal screamed behind us. Through the rear window, we could see massive claws puncturing the bedliner, each one as thick as my thumb, curved like meat hooks, scrabbling for purchase on the metal. The thing's weight made the truck fishtail wildly as we hit the main road, doing 70 miles an hour. The creature's face pressed against the back window for one horrible second. Up close, I saw it had skin like a bat's wing stretched over too many bones. Its eyes weren't in sockets, they were just stuck into the flesh wherever. It raised a massive paw and brought it down on the roof of the cab. The metal buckled inward with a sound like a giant stepping on a soda can, and safety glass from the rear window exploded, pelting us like hail. Just as I thought the roof would collapse, we hit the bridge over Miller's Creek, doing almost 80. The sudden change from asphalt to concrete joints made the whole truck bounce violently. The creature lost its grip, sliding backward in the truck bed with a furious shriek that sounded like tearing sheet metal. That's when I remembered the railroad crossing a quarter-mile ahead. I knew I had to hit it at full speed, yelling at Travis and Bethany to brace themselves. The impact when we hit those tracks was brutal, launching the entire truck airborne for a moment. I heard the creature hit something hard as it was thrown from the bed, followed by the sound of it crashing through the woods beside the road, branches snapping like firecrackers. I didn't stop driving until we reached the 24-hour gas station at the edge of town, pulling up under the brightest lights. My dad's truck looked like it had been attacked by a gang with sledgehammers and pickaxes. The roof was caved in. The bed was shredded with those massive claw marks, some of them punched clean through the metal. The tailgate hung by one hinge, and a thick, dark substance was splattered across the bed that smelled like a mixture of tar and spoiled meat. Travis threw up in the parking lot while Bethany called her mom with some story about hitting a deer. We never reported it to the police, we just told my dad that vandals had trashed his truck while we were at a movie. He didn't believe us, but what was the alternative? The local news ran a story 3 days later about a bear being spotted near the old playhouse. They showed blurry trail cam footage and brought in wildlife experts who suggested black bears can grow much larger than usual. But I know what bears look like, and that thing had too many joints in its legs, too many eyes, and no bear leaves claw marks that go through quarter-inch steel. The Purple Castle is still standing on Route 47. I drive past it sometimes during the day, but I always speed up when I do, and I never, ever look at it after dark. For spring break of my junior year, 5 college friends and I decided to go camping at a lake about 3 hours north of campus. We were all stressed from midterms and figured a weekend in nature at Silver Pine Lake would help us decompress. It was one of those places locals knew about but wasn't yet overrun with tourists. The group was me, my roommate Brandon, Nathan from our stats class, Brandon's girlfriend Ashley, her roommate Claire, and Claire's cousin Jenna. We loaded up 2 cars on a Friday afternoon and hit the road. The weather was perfect, mid-70s with 0 chance of rain. We reached the lake around sunset. The water was like glass, reflecting the insane orange and pink sky. We found a clearing about 50 yards from the shore with a ready-made fire pit. We set up our 3 tents, Brandon and Ashley in one, Nathan and I in another, and Claire and Jenna in the third. That first night was exactly what we'd hoped for. We cooked hot dogs, drank beer and told stories. Nathan played some guitar while we made s'mores. Around 1100 p.m., we noticed another group's fire flickering across the lake, maybe half a mile away. The sounds out there were incredible: owls hooting, fish jumping, branches creaking. By midnight, we were all asleep. I woke up around 7:30 a.m. to the sun hitting our tent. I quietly unzipped the flap to step out. The morning was gorgeous. Mist coming off the lake, birds everywhere. But when I turned back to zip the tent up, I saw it. There was a cut running down the side of our tent, about 3 feet long, perfectly straight, like someone had used a razor. The fabric was separated cleanly, and I could see Nathan's sleeping bag through the gap. At first, I thought we'd snagged it, but the cut was too precise, too deliberate. Then I noticed the edges of the fabric were frayed outward, which meant it had been cut from the outside. My first instinct was to check for theft. I looked through our backpacks. Wallets, phones, camera, everything was still there. That made it even weirder. I woke Nathan up, and we immediately checked the others. Brandon and Ashley's tent had an identical cut, same length, same precision, running parallel to the ground. Brandon crawled out, took one look, and immediately went into protective mode. The girls' tent was the worst. 2 cuts forming an X pattern on the side facing the woods. We all knew this was intentional. Someone had walked through our camp while we were sleeping and cut our tents with something sharp. But why? Nothing was missing, and no one was hurt. Jenna pointed out that whoever did this had to be incredibly quiet. We were only 10 feet apart, and none of us heard a thing. The cuts were so clean that the person must have used a fresh blade. We had a group meeting by the dead fire pit. Nathan suggested animals, but we all dismissed that. Bears don't make surgical cuts in perfect lines. Brandon wanted to pack up and leave immediately, but Ashley pointed out we'd driven 3 hours and paid for 2 nights. Claire had a different theory. Maybe it was some kind of local hazing or a prank by teenagers. She had found a forum post from 2 years ago mentioning vandalism at Silver Pine Lake, though nothing specific to tent cutting. Something organic and sickening, like roadkill left to bake in the sun. We flew down those balcony stairs, our footsteps thundering through the building, with that grinding, scraping noise following right above. In the lobby, Travis tripped hard over a pile of old programs, his phone skittering across the floor, its light spinning crazily. As Bethany and I hauled him up, wood splintered above us, followed by a crash that shook dust from every surface. Through the doorway, we saw something dropping from the ceiling in chunks. Not just plaster, but something dark and wet that hit the seats with heavy, meaty thuds. The side door was only 20 feet away, but those were the longest 20 feet of my life, especially when the thing started moving faster, the building's old timbers creaking and popping under its massive weight. We burst out into the cold November air. I had the truck keys out instantly, fumbling at the door, when Travis screamed and pointed. Something huge was perched on the bell tower, silhouetted against the moon. It was the size of a small car, but moved like a massive cat, muscles rippling under patchy fur or feathers. The violet glow pulsed from inside the tower, casting a sick outline around its body. Its head turned toward us, and even from 50 yards away, its eyes reflected our flashlights. Except there were too many of them, arranged horribly across its face. It made a sound like a deep whistle mixed with grinding metal and started climbing down the brick, its claws tearing deep gouges. The truck started on the second try. I threw it into reverse, spinning gravel as we tore out. Behind us, the thing hit the ground with a thud we felt through the truck, followed by the sound of it running. Heavy, rhythmic impacts were gaining on us fast. Bethany was screaming as it leapt after us on all fours, covering 15 feet with each bound. I hit 60 on the narrow road. In the side mirror, those eyes, all 6 or 7 of them, were closing the distance. Then it jumped, launching itself in an impossible arc that brought it down right in the truck bed with an impact that lifted the front wheels. The truck swerved violently as I fought for control. Through the rear window, massive claws punctured the bedliner, hooks of thick metal tearing the steel. The creature's face pressed against the back window for a horrible second. Up close, it had skin like a bat's wing stretched over too many bones, the eyes simply stuck in the flesh. It brought a massive paw down on the cab roof, and the metal buckled inward with a sound like a giant stepping on a soda can. Just then, we hit the bridge over Miller's Creek. The sudden jarring bounce threw the creature backward in the truck bed, with a furious shriek like tearing sheet metal. I remembered the railroad crossing ahead, the one you had to slow down for. Instead, I yelled at them to brace and hit it at full speed. The impact launched the entire truck into the air. I heard the creature hit something hard as it was thrown from the bed, followed by the sound of it crashing through the woods. I didn't stop driving until we reached the 24-hour gas station on the edge of town. My dad's truck looked like it had been savaged. The roof was caved in, the bed was shredded with those enormous claw marks, and there was a thick, dark substance splattered everywhere that smelled like tar and spoiled meat. We never reported it. We told my dad vandals trashed his truck. He didn't believe it, but what else could we say? 3 days later, the news ran a story about a large bear spotted near the playhouse, showing blurry trail cam footage. But I know what we saw. That thing had too many joints, too many eyes, and no bear tears through quarter-inch steel. I still speed up when I drive past the Purple Castle in the daytime. I never look at it after dark. We spent the next hour meticulously going through our gear, checking the car tires, making sure nothing else was damaged. I walked down to the lake shore to clear my head and see if any other campers might have noticed something. The campsite across the lake was already empty. Nathan and I hiked over there around 9:30 a.m. Their fire pit was cold, but we found fresh tire tracks leaving the access road, a few empty cans, and, strangely, a brand new roll of duct tape still in its packaging, just sitting on a log. We both had the same thought: why leave that behind? On our walk back, we ran into an older couple, Dorothy and her husband, who were camping nearby in a large RV. Dorothy said they'd never heard of anything like this. Her husband mentioned seeing headlights moving slowly through the woods around 2:00 a.m., stopping for about 10 minutes near where our camp was, then continuing toward the far side of the lake. When we told the others about the headlights, the mood shifted completely. Ashley started packing. She wasn't spending another night there. I didn't blame her. But Claire made a point: whoever did this wanted to scare us, and if we left, they won. She suggested we stay, but take serious precautions. We could move our tents closer together, take shifts, and keep the fire blazing all night. Nathan knew how to set up a perimeter alarm using fishing line and empty cans. Everyone agreed to it. We spent the rest of the morning using the duct tape we'd found to repair the cuts. A weird bit of irony. Brandon drove into town to buy supplies: batteries, an air horn, and energy drinks for the watch shifts. The day dragged by with a palpable tension. We kept scanning the tree line. Around 4:00 p.m., 2 guys in a small fishing boat drifted close to our shore. They looked to be in their 30s, wearing matching camo jackets despite the heat. They didn't fish, they just drifted for 15 minutes, staring at our camp. When Brandon waved, they didn't wave back, just started their motor and headed away. Jenna took photos. Later, zoomed in, we saw one had a knife sheath on his belt. The other was holding something wrapped in a dark cloth in his lap. By nightfall, our defenses were set. The tents were in a tight triangle around the fire pit, and Nathan's alarm system circled 20 feet out. We agreed on 3-hour shifts, 2 people awake at all times. We tried to act normal, but every snapping twig made us jump. Brandon and Ashley took first watch, reporting only strange splashing sounds from the lake. Nathan and I took the middle shift at 1:00 a.m., armed with the air horn. Around 20:30 a.m., as I was tending the fire, Nathan grabbed my arm. He pointed his flashlight toward the trees, and I saw them: 2 figures standing just outside our alarm perimeter, about 30 feet away. They weren't moving, just standing there watching us. I grabbed the air horn and shouted that we could see them, and they needed to leave. They didn't respond or move, standing there for maybe 30 seconds. Then they simply turned and walked calmly back into the woods. No rushing, no running. We woke everyone up immediately, and stayed huddled around the fire until sunrise. We packed everything in record time. No one suggested staying. While we were taking down the tents, Claire found something that froze us. There were fresh cuts in the fabric again, smaller this time, only 2 or 3 inches long, on the backsides of each tent, the sides facing away from the fire. These cuts were different, arranged in patterns. 3 parallel lines on my tent, a small triangle on Brandon's, and what looked like the letter V on the girls' tent. They must have done it while we were all watching the 2 figures at the front of the camp. There had been more of them circling us, marking our tents while we were distracted. The realization that they had been that close, even with our precautions, made us move even faster. On the drive home, Ashley pulled up local news. 3 weeks before our trip, a family had abandoned their campsite at Silver Pine Lake after finding their tent slashed. A week before that, a couple reported similar vandalism. We never reported what happened to us, but I still think about those 2 figures standing calmly in the darkness, and the deliberate patterns of those cuts. Vanished in Glacier Ridge Saturday night changed everything for me. I'm a 28-year-old park ranger in Montana, and I was out with my two buddies, Ryan and Steve, on what should have been a routine 3-hour loop through Glacier Ridge Trail. We started around 9:00 p.m. About an hour in, we reached the steepest part of the trail. Ryan was leading, I was in the middle, and Steve was bringing up the rear. The rhythm of our 3 sets of boots crunching on the path was hypnotic. Then I realized the rhythm was off. I was only hearing 2 sets of footsteps. I stopped and turned. The trail was empty. "Ryan, hold up," I called out. "Steve's not behind us." We scanned the trail, calling his name, but only our voices echoed back. There was no signal, so we decided to backtrack. After about 5 minutes, Ryan grabbed my arm and pointed at the dirt. Steve's footprints were clear as day, heading in the same direction we had been walking. We followed them carefully. But right in the middle of the trail, the footprints just stopped. Not at a rock, not near a tree, but right there in the center. The last print was perfect, complete, as if he'd taken one more step and then simply ceased to exist. Beyond that point, the dirt was undisturbed. No drag marks, no sign of struggle. We stood there, staring at the impossible sight. I got down on my knees, running my fingers through the loose soil. If he had jumped or been grabbed, there would be marks. Then Ryan pointed out something I hadn't noticed about 10 feet past, where Steve's tracks ended. Our own footprints from earlier continued on, undisturbed, all 3 sets walking in formation. His tracks showed him walking back toward us before stopping. My mind seized on the impossibility. We spent the next hour searching. The forest was eerily quiet. At one point, we both thought we heard Steve's voice calling back from up the trail. We ran toward the sound, but found nothing. Except, 50 yards from where the first set ended, we found another set of Steve's fresh footprints. These only went for about 10 steps before they too stopped dead in the middle of the path. My mind raced. How could he move between those 2 spots without leaving tracks in between? Then we heard it clearly this time, Steve's distinctive laugh. The weird snorting sound he made when something truly amused him. It came from above us, in the canopy of trees. The beam of my flashlight caught something pale 30 feet up. It was Steve's backpack, hanging from a branch, swaying slightly. The tree trunk showed no signs of being climbed. Then we noticed our phones, which had shown no signal earlier, now displayed full bars. Ryan called Steve's phone, and we could hear it ringing from inside the hanging backpack. When the call connected, all we heard was breathing, slow and deliberate, definitely human but somehow wrong. Not Steve's breathing. "Steve, if this is a joke, it's not funny anymore," Ryan said, his voice cracking. The breathing continued. Then the line went dead. We tried calling back, but it went straight to voicemail. That's when things became terrifying. We started hearing footsteps circling us, heavy and deliberate, crunching through the undergrowth. But every time we pointed our lights, there was nothing there. The footsteps would stop when we looked, then start again from a different direction, tightening the circle. Ryan and I stood back to back. That's when I saw him, or what I thought was him. Steve was standing 20 feet away, just at the edge of our light, but his body was turned away, and his head was twisted around at an impossible angle, looking directly at us with eyes that reflected our lights like an animal's. Before we could react, he turned and walked backward into the darkness, his head still facing us, moving in a way human bodies simply shouldn't. We ran, faster than I've ever run. Behind us, we heard those footsteps keeping pace. At one point, Ryan tripped, and when I helped him up, I saw Steve again, crouched on a boulder above us like a gargoyle, his limbs bent at weird angles. Then we heard Steve's actual voice calling for help from somewhere behind us, desperate and terrified. The thing on the boulder tilted its head at the sound, then scuttled away with movements that reminded me of an insect. We ran, ignoring the cries for help that kept changing location. We made it back to the parking area, where Ryan's car and Steve's truck were parked. Then we saw the figure standing at the edge of the lot. It looked like Steve, standing completely still. As we drove out, our headlights swept across the figure. For just a second, I saw its face clearly. It had Steve's features, but the expression was blank, empty, like a copy without the humanity. We drove straight to the police station. They found his backpack the next morning, but they never found Steve. Ryan and I barely talk about that night, but I know we both still have nightmares. Whatever we saw in those woods, whatever was wearing Steve's face, that wasn't him. The smell of campfire smoke still makes me nauseous. Every time I catch a whiff of it, my whole body tenses up, and I'm right back at that campsite in Redwood National Park. It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway, just me and the giant trees for 4 days in early June. I'd driven 6 hours from San Francisco in my old Ford Ranger. the truck bed loaded with way too much gear for one person. The divorce papers had been finalized 2 weeks earlier, and staring at code all day wasn't helping me process any of it. I needed real silence, the kind you only get miles away from cell towers. The park ranger barely looked up when I signed in, just reminded me about food storage and handed me a backcountry permit for Section 7, a remote area. The hike to my spot took about 40 minutes, following a narrow trail between trees so massive they made me feel like an ant. I chose a designated clearing near a small creek. While setting up my bright orange tent, the same one my ex-wife used to call aggressively visible, I kept hearing the normal sounds of the forest. But as the sun got low and I was boiling water for dinner, I spotted smoke rising through the trees, maybe 200 yards away. Another fire pit, with 3 figures moving around it. They weren't making any noise, which was strange. I squinted through the trees as darkness crept in, 2 men and a woman. They moved around the fire in a deliberate, almost choreographed way. I couldn't see any tents or gear. The woman had long hair, one man was tall, maybe 6'5" or more, and the shorter guy kept pacing in a tight, always clockwise circle. I told myself they were just day hikers warming up, but they weren't wearing standard hiking clothes. Around 9:00 p.m., I was settling in with a book when I heard footsteps outside my tent. Not animals, but measured, careful steps on the pine needles. I clicked off my headlamp and listened. The footsteps circled my campsite, pausing every few feet. Through the mesh, I could barely make out the silhouette of the tall man. He stood there for maybe 5 minutes, completely still, facing my tent. I held my breath, gripping my knife. Then he turned and walked back toward the trees unhurried. I didn't sleep after that. Around midnight, I heard them talking. Not words, but low, rhythmic sounds that carried through the forest, more like a guttural chant, or humming that would rise and fall in waves. When I peeked out, their fire was blazing, throwing wild shadows against the trees. I counted 5 people around it instead of 3. The worst part came around 2:00 a.m. The chanting had stopped, and the forest went completely quiet. Then I heard my name. Clear as day, someone called out, "Daniel," from the direction of their camp. Not shouting, just speaking it normally. The thing is, I had signed the register as D. Coleman. I hadn't told anyone my name. They called it out 3 more times, spacing it out, each time in that same conversational tone, like they were checking if I was awake. I gripped my knife, but the thought of walking past their camp to reach the trail made hiking out impossible. I must have dozed off because I woke up to the sun. For a brief moment, I thought it was a dream. Then I unzipped my tent and saw my backpack. I'd left it hanging from a branch, but now it was on the ground, the contents scattered. My gear, water filter, first aid kit, and food, was arranged in a perfect circle around the base of the tree. My clothes were folded into neat little squares and stacked like a pyramid. But the really disturbing part was my wallet. Every single card had been removed and planted in the dirt like little tombstones, all facing my tent. My driver's license was front and center, followed by my credit cards and even my library card, standing upright in perfect rows. I started throwing everything into my pack, desperate to leave. That's when I noticed the footprints everywhere around my campsite. Dozens of them, overlapping, circling. They had walked around my tent all night. Some of the prints were bare feet, which made no sense given the cold. As I finished packing, I looked toward their camp. Nothing. No sign anyone had been there. The fire pit was full of old leaves and moss. The ground where I'd seen them standing showed no footprints, no disturbance at all. The hike back to my truck took less than 30 minutes. I practically ran. When I burst into the parking area, a young couple was just arriving. I must have looked insane, sweaty, wild-eyed, sprinting out of the forest at 7:00 a.m. As I backed out, I slammed on the brakes. There was a piece of paper under my windshield wiper. My hands shook as I grabbed it. It was a receipt from a gas station in Eureka, dated 3 days ago, with my credit card number on it. The signature line had, "Daniel," written in handwriting that wasn't mine. I'd never been to Eureka. I checked my banking app once I got a signal. A charge for $47.83 at a Shell station in Eureka. I called the credit card company right there. The woman on the phone pulled up more charges: a motel in Crescent City, a diner in McKinleyville, all from the past week, all signed with my name, but not my handwriting. The drive home was a blur. I checked my mirrors constantly, convinced I was being followed. I didn't leave my San Francisco apartment for 2 days. On the 3rd day, an unordered package arrived. Inside was a Forest Service map of Redwood National Park. Someone had drawn red circles around 7 different camping areas, including mine, each with a date written next to it. At the bottom, someone had written, "Thanks for visiting." in the same handwriting from the receipt. I researched those dates. 4 of the 6 matched up with missing hiker reports. People who went camping alone and vanished. Their cars found. Their campsites discovered days later with everything neatly arranged, but no sign of them. The Park Service blamed it on inexperience or wildlife. I reported everything, but without evidence, the police couldn't do anything. I still have that map. I think about the 2 dates that didn't match any missing person reports. Maybe those people never reported what happened. Maybe they're like me, sitting in their apartments, trying to convince themselves it was a prank, knowing deep down it wasn't. Those people at the fire pit, whatever they were, they're still out there,